Hello, everyone. We're glad you're here. Welcome to our podcast, Foundations, Expert Concrete Training and Adventures, hosted by concretepreneur and industry-recognized expert David Stevenson, and joined by new guests every episode. David has been in the concrete industry for over 20 years as a contractor, operator, owner, product developer, and consultant, and has started, grown, and sold contracting companies as well as chemical manufacturing and equipment companies, and is currently the principal consultant with PCC Consulting. With clients ranging from the NFL to Amazon to the Department of Defense, the largest and most recognized brands have consulted with David for their programs and project issues. Foundations is a free podcast for general as well as specialized contractors, owners, designers and architects, developers, and other concrete enthusiasts who may enjoy and benefit from being a part of conversations David has with industry leaders and some of the incredible people he's worked with over his career. We discuss where the industry has been, where it's going, and adventures to be had along the way. Now, here's your host, David Stevenson, interrupted with the occasional question by me, Rachel Fisher.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Foundations Podcast. Appreciate you joining us today. Our guest today is a guy that's been a good friend of mine for over 15 years. I don't even really know exactly how long. Sloan Harris, who is now the principal or a partner principal architect at VLK Architects in Fort Worth, Texas, with offices in Dallas, Houston, and El Paso. Is that right, Sloan?
And Austin and San Antonio.
San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, El Paso, and Houston. So, Sloan, thanks for joining us. I appreciate you coming on with us.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
So, one of the things that I try to start off with on these podcasts, especially with people that I've known for a while, is just kind of a general recollection of where we met, circumstances of how we ended up getting connected, and then, you know, you and I have known each other long enough that we've evolved in our families and our work lives. Do you remember when you and I met?
I'm fairly certain. I started as a construction administrator, so that's the role that I was in when we met. And I think it was at Ryan High School in Denton ISD with their new field house that we were doing, and we had specified polished concrete for that project. And you were running American Polished Concrete at the time. I think was the name of your company.
Concrete, yeah.
American Concrete, and polished concrete was new to us. And I think you and I had met in the field to go over a few things in regards to the installation and the process, as well as the equipment. I think that was a big piece there because they didn't have adequate power yet. So I think you had to bring in one of your trucks with your generators to adequately supply power to your polishers, if I recall.
And you guys had, my recollection is similar. You guys had done a couple of polished concrete projects like recently, immediately before that had some issues. And I remember going back to the office and sitting with you, going through photos of other jobs, kind of pointing out what I thought the issues were, even, you know, kind of sight unseen, and showing you like scratches or, you know, where they used sealer instead of getting a mechanical finish and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You remember that part? That was kind of fun for me.
Yeah, it's fun for me as well because I was learning, right? Like I said, it was new to us as a firm. And I had no idea of all that we needed to put into it to prepare the flooring and the concrete for this finished typology and all the opportunities we had from a design standpoint.
So then for the next few years, I think I helped you guys tighten up a specification so that you could, you know, get better projects out there, even projects that we had nothing to do with. But I think for the next couple of years, I think my company at that time, I think we did most of the polished concrete work that VLK managed just because, I was a known quantity and was easy for you to communicate with. And you kind of, on Denton Ryan, I kind of showed you guys what we could do, and it kind of led to some trust that you were able to transfer into your customers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. I would say that you've had a role, whether it's doing the installation or doing the specifying or consulting, probably 99% of VLK's projects that had polished concrete in them.
Yeah. When I sold American Concrete and started polished concrete consultants, I remember I came into the office and you were like, there was like 5 or 6 people in the room with me, and I had said, this is what I've done. I've got this consulting, and now at this point I'm not a contractor anymore. So regardless of the work, or regardless of who's doing it, I'm able to basically do what I'd already been doing, but in a more formal, broader kind of role. And you guys were pretty happy about that.
Yeah, that was
just because you could use me more. Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. And being a third-party consultant rather than an actual contractor, I think, was beneficial from our standpoint as well as the architect.
Have you, I usually have been involved in a lot of the projects since. Have you ever had an issue? This is more a curious question for me. Have you ever had an issue in valuing my services or my contribution to a customer?
No, maybe the very first time with a particular client, but as soon as they saw I'll call it the complexity of what is required for a good polished concrete project, after that one time, it was automatic after that. It's like, we do not want to leave anything to chance with this project. I mean, concrete obviously is a very critical path component of the construction project, and anything that goes wrong with it is very invasive to fix in most cases. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about the finished product that gets, we start at almost the very beginning of going vertical with a project, and in some cases 2.5 years later, that's got to be the finished product. So I think that all the clients that we work with that have the standard for their flooring as polished concrete, some form or fashion, value the consultation that you bring.
Cool, great. Well, so in our pre-podcast discussion, as usually happens, you and I talk, fairly frequently, not all the time, but fairly frequently. We started out with one thing and then led right into some other topics. And so the topic that we were on immediately prior to the start of the podcast was setting customer expectations. So polished concrete, basically you're turning the building foundation into the finished flooring, and it has strengths, really low maintenance, and you can do a lot of design work and stuff like that with it. You can make it look like terrazzo or whatever as well, but there are some expectations and weaknesses. So, in your kind of the vein of discussing setting the expectations with the customers, can you kind of talk a little bit about the work that you guys do and how we set those expectations?
Yeah, and I think that to start off with my answer, architects can be their own worst enemy, and in setting correct expectations, because we get really excited about the opportunities that polished concrete affords us, and we start using nomenclature about terrazzo, and it's like terrazzo but a lot less expensive. You can get the look of terrazzo, the longevity of it's better, the maintenance of it's way less. And you get the client excited, and then you're at ribbon cutting, or at the end of the project, and you start to see what all concrete does. You start to see hairline cracking, just the natural things that concrete will do, and the clients and can get frustrated with that because the expectations weren't set correctly to begin with. Now, you and I know, and we've done this. There's things that you can do to negotiate those things that concrete will do in the way you specify the concrete finish and the concrete mixes. But again, that's another expectation, because if you look at it in layman's terms, if I'm presenting polished concrete as a finish for their floor and they haven't experienced that in any of their building types, they're going to immediately go to things like a Home Depot, or in some cases, maybe even a museum. And if we don't say yes, but, to get that Home Depot smoothness, you got to have a super flat floor specification, which obviously adds levels of complexity to the construction sequencing, to the concrete installation, and the cost on that side of the equation.
Right.
But you're going to get the finish. Or can you go with a typical flatness for this particular building type, with the understanding that as you look across that polished concrete floor, you're going to see waves, you're going to see hairline cracking, etc. So, and it just depends on the client. It depends on the building, what they want at the end. Sometimes we will deliberately make it do that because we want, like the look of a rehabilitated industrial warehouse. Other times we do want that very high level finish, which you and I have experienced together, where we do go in with a higher level of floor flatness to be able to get closer to that museum quality finish.
So for the listeners on the call, terrazzo is a very old flooring type, and basically you're pouring between 1/2 inch and 2 inches of a new surface over the top of the existing concrete foundation. Kind of one of the characteristics of terrazzo is a lot of exposed aggregate. So you can kind of decide on the color or the size of the rocks that you want to be included in the mix. And then when they pour the terrazzo and grind it, those rocks are exposed and you can see them as you walk around. So most airports, for example, in the United States have terrazzo. But terrazzo currently is averaging cost at around $26 a square foot. So it's very expensive. Polished concrete with exposed aggregate and all the, little things that come along with it to get it right and smooth and going to be lasting for decades, currently is costing around $6 or $6.50 per square foot. So give or take $20 per square foot less. Now the difference between the terrazzo and exposed aggregate polished concrete is the concrete is the building foundation. So you have shrinkage and expansion and things like that, where the terrazzo, similar to tile or some other options, is essentially a floor covering. So if the concrete is cracked underneath the underneath the terrazzo, it a lot of times won't telegraph through for years, sometimes decades, before that crack makes its way through into the terrazzo surface. So if you're an owner, on one hand, you can pay, literally $20 more per square foot and get a virtually perfect floor, or you can save $20 a square foot and get a floor that 9.5 people out of 10 would never see any of the imperfections. And so we've done some pretty cool projects with that I've gotten to do with VLK. I remember that first school project, if I'm not mistaken, I think we did like 13 logos on that project.
That's right.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was one of my favorite parts of that project.
So, this is a big high school for set expectations. And we did a logo for the football team, a logo for the basketball team, a logo for the men's basketball team, one for the women's, one for the baseball team, one for the softball team, men's and women's soccer. I mean, every sport had its own variation on their school mascot and the logo, but with twists and designs that you guys did at VLK, that you guys did for the school district. And I remember that grand opening. Oh my gosh, that superintendent and school board, they were just in love with all the design work we were able to do on essentially what was a, not a great slab prepared for concrete. It was not the perfect scenario, but I think all the design work actually took focus away from those imperfections.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And it gave us a new avenue to design flooring finishes and all the things that were possible with polished concrete. When I very first was introduced to it, it's like, okay, you can do an integral color, and you can do an exposed aggregate, or sanded finish. But then when you started bringing in, you can do this with the aggregate, you can do this with color, you can do this with overlays, you can do this with a border, as it can be difficult to get the consistency all the way up against the wall, especially the way that our buildings are constructed and sequenced. It really opened up my eyes to all the possibilities.
So the sequence you're talking about is when you put up CMU block wall and then pour concrete into the form that's left behind. It's really hard to get power trowels or mechanical equipment up in that last couple of inches next to the already placed block wall. And so what that does is it creates, you go from a dense hard finish through the middle of a hallway or whatever to a really kind of pitted porous finish the last couple of inches. So what I showed VOK that we could do is on buildings that were designed that way, basically do a 4-inch wide kickoff mirroring the size of the cove base on the wall. And we can color and seal that border, turning it in at doorways and things like that. So all the traffic is on the really high durability polished concrete finish, but we effectively create a border around the perimeter that hides that pitted porous surface up next to the block wall. That's what you're talking about, right?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah. So just one clarification, because not everybody on this that listens to our podcast has experienced that, or they may be building owners or other architects who just wanted to get some clarification. So
sure.
Concrete enthusiasts like myself.
Yeah, Rachel calls herself a concrete enthusiast because when she never even looked at the ground, never looked at a floor when she came to us, started working with me, and now she walks around everywhere looking down. She runs into walls and people all the time.
Okay.
Sloan, in your experience, so I have a couple of just kind of general questions. What is let's set aside the project where we did all the different logos. What has been your favorite project that you and I have worked on over the years? One that you said, man, that one went a little bit sideways in the beginning, but oh my gosh, the way it turned out at the end is amazing.
Oh, well, since you teed it up like that, you know what my answer is going to be. It's going to be the Career and Technology Center, Dan Diper Career and Technology Center in Arlington ISD. Obviously, I'm biased because we designed the project and it's an incredible facility, but that was a perfect example of, if it can go wrong, it did at the beginning of the construction phase. But it gave us opportunities to come in and really enhance the flooring finish, to correct some of the things that the construction manager experienced early on, and it resulted in just a more optimal flooring finish that I think everybody was super pleased with. I certainly was. I think you were, David, and I know the district was. Yeah, we
won a national award for that project.
That's right.
So for the listeners, the project that Sloan's talking about, it was one where I was engaged early on, and we designed everything very tightly. The mixes were right, the finishing was pretty good. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't horrible either. We had good flatness, levelness. Everything was in pretty good shape. The contractor came in and did the main grind on part of the building and did not do an early grind on the other half of the building at the time, which actually gave us some great information where I had been telling you guys that main grinds early, help and don't hurt. But sometimes the GCs would say, oh, we don't want to grind it till later because it'll take out problems. And so this was actually a great project for that, because you had half the school effectively that was ground 10 days after the concrete was poured, before the walls were up, and the other half of the project was ground 9 months in. And so throughout the entire project, I don't really know all the circumstances, and I don't want to really kind of get into a lot of the, who's responsible for anything. But bottom line was they had a lot of screws in their lift tires, and that were, they didn't even try. There was not a lot of protection done or forethought to say, hey, you got to remove nails and screws out of the tires underneath a 3,000-pound lift, because the screws will make little holes in the concrete. And they would, we actually called that out a few times, and it never got fixed. And then in addition, I don't even know who was doing it, but one of the trades, they would lift their material delivery pallets up like a quarter of an inch off the floor. Well, they would have nails sticking down or screws sticking down, and they would just, with the power pallet jack, just drag those pallets all over the place, a lot of weight. So they would gouge and scar up the floor too. So when we showed up to do the finish polish floor, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but we had like some bands of larger rock, and then the majority of the floor space was like a sand aggregate, more monolithic finish. That was the design, right?
That's exactly right.
So when we show up to do the final polishing on the floor, literally there were hundreds of thousands of chips, give or take, I don't know, an eighth of an inch to a quarter of an inch deep. And the interesting kind of takeaway was that in the area that we'd done the main grind early, the chips were smaller and not near as deep, because the sand aggregate in that exposure held up to the damage better than the paste only on the half that had not been ground at all. Those chips were deeper and larger in size, even though they're caused by the same thing. So the result, or what we ended up having to do there, because of a lack of protection and no way to polish this kind of cratered, pitted surface, we ground down into the large aggregate and ground through the majority of the damage over the entire project. Well, oh my gosh, now you basically have that really high end, $25 to $30 a foot floor with this large aggregate exposed everywhere, and a really, really nice, clean, clear reflection finish. And it turned out awesome. And then your design with the high windows and everything just made the lighting in the space reflected off the floor just awesome. Is there anything I'm forgetting there?
No, I think that's exactly why we had such an opportunity to enhance the finish of the floors through correcting those things that happen throughout the course of construction, and gain the benefit of having a truly large aggregate exposure throughout the entire facility that gave it a much more consistent look, took away all the inconsistencies and imperfections like the pitting, hid any of the natural hairline cracking that you'll have in concrete. And in a lot of ways, since we had not specified a super flat floor in that project, even though you're still going to have kind of waves in the finish just through natural concrete placement, it kind of minimized that as well. So we really gained a lot of benefit from the remediation work that was done that we specified for them, and to help them overcome the things that occurred during construction.
In this, in the idea that some of our listeners are going to be other architects or building owners or designers or property managers, I want to point out one other important thing. So by having our specifications right from the very beginning, from when the job was bid out, we had language in the specs that called for protection of the floors. And we even had in the specs language discussing making sure that screws were removed out of tires. And then every time that either I or any of your team would go out to the site, we were documenting the issues that we were running into. Well, then when it came to the end of the project and we basically laid our cards on the table, there was really no good comeback from the general contractor. And between, I don't really know how they got the funds together to do it, but effectively, the school district didn't pay any extra money for that correction and didn't spend any more dollars to get that higher end floor because we designed and specified around it from the beginning. So we set that expectation early to kind of tie back into our prior section. That kind of happens more than, if your specs are right, that happens more than somebody messes up and then, the owner pays if you have the specs right. Is that right? Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the tighter your specs are and the more they are, and in this scenario with polished concrete, there's so many trades that need to be aware of what the requirements are for the floor finish and the protection that's required and the protection of the equipment that they use. But obviously, anytime your specifications are tighter, the more ability the architect and owner have to ensure that the design intent's met. But as tight as our specs were on that project, we still had those issues. And it really comes down to training the construction manager and all of the subs about what's required in order to meet the specification requirements and meet the design intent. Because, like you mentioned earlier, going in with an early grind is so foreign to them because they are viewing the polished concrete process the same way they view lane tile. It's a way to finish off the building and pretty up any imperfections, hide imperfections, make corrections with the flooring finish on top of the substrate, whatever that substrate might be. But that obviously doesn't work with polished concrete. There's so many things that have to happen from the onset and then maintain throughout the entire construction phase. So it's not just the construction manager. I mean, it goes all the way to the fire sprinkler sub. In fact, they're probably the most egregious because they don't have any interest in anything that's going on with the floor. So, you get oil spillage, you get burn marks, you get, like you mentioned earlier, screws in their scissor lift tires as they're going throughout the facility. And we've seen it. You can see, every 12 inches, there's a divot. That must have been from the same screw rolling in the wheel.
And it stops right under all the light fixtures. Right. I wonder what trade did that.
So you can't just think, if I got it specified really tight. It's a constant discussion throughout the entire course of the project. And as we all know, construction is very messy. You can have all the flooring protection that you want, and then you get a really wet season. The flooring protection is going to get torn up and it has to be replaced. You get water trapped under some of the flooring protection, which can cause staining that's hard to remove once you're doing your final polishing passes. There's just a multitude of things. It's no different than any other trade. I mean, just because you have the tightest roofing spec on the planet doesn't mean that you can just leave the entire construction teams to their own devices. It has to be monitored. There's a lot of people that are affected. There's the roofer, there's the steel installer with the metal deck, or the concrete installer if we're doing lightweight concrete, the carpenter that's doing the wood for the parapet wall caps if those are in play, the sheet metal subcontractor for the parapet caps. I mean, the mechanical contractor and the roof curbs and how those are flashed. I mean, everybody's affected, and it couldn't be more true than for polished concrete, because every trade in the project is using equipment that will be on those floors throughout the process.
Yep. So when I'm explaining that or discussing, just kind of the protection or preparation or thought process through construction, I say a couple of things. I say, first, a a lot of the things that polished concrete needs are actually the same things a lot of other flooring needs, but you can hide on the other flooring types easier for a period of time than you can on polished concrete. So you mentioned one that's like pipe threading. So the fine oil that they use to thread pipe that's cut to install the sprinkler systems. Well, that oil is very viscous. It's very thin, and it gets into concrete very easily because concrete's porous. Well, if you have pipe threading oil all over and you're putting a tile floor on, that tile will hold for a few months. It might even hold for a year, but it's not going to bond to that floor underneath that's coated in oil. That oil is going to be a bond breaker. Same thing, the oil can leach back through carpet. I've seen projects like that. And so protecting a slab, regardless of the flooring type, against a whole bunch of oil is something that should be done all the time, no matter the flooring finish. But a lot of times, I think people get used to covering stuff. And if it doesn't cause an issue that moment or that week or that month that you do the turnover, then a lot of times it just kind of gets swept under the rug and nobody really pays attention to it until you're a couple of years in and it's past your warranty period. And then somebody from the facility is in there trying to change out tile because it's all popped and delaminated. So a lot of the things that we do are just common sense things that should be done all the time, right?
Oh, absolutely. But you know how human nature is, people are reluctant to change. And the sequence of construction and some of the things that you just mentioned that have to happen in order to have a successful polished concrete floor at the end of the project they change in a sense to the way that construction managers and general contractors are used to sequencing their construction and used to dealing with the things you just mentioned. So it's really just, again, just like we talked about with setting expectations for the end user, it's also setting expectations and establishing an understanding of requirements in order to meet the design requirements and the specification for polished concrete. And it's not something that you can just say once. Like I said, it's a constant, you revisit it every time you're on site.
So I'm going to tell you a funny story that kind of gives this, brings it all to focus pretty easily. And I'm going to preface this story by saying that this was absolutely not a VLK project. So even though I'm talking with you, this is not a VLK project. In fact, it wasn't even in Texas. It wasn't even in the South. So a major general contractor, one of the top 50 largest general contractors in the country, is owned by a family, and they were building a new headquarters, their new headquarters building. And I'd done a lot of polished concrete work with them before. And so I got involved very early on in specs and design. And, because it was GC's own building, the architects actually had a little bit less to do with it than they might normally, because the GC has obviously a lot of experience and they kind of know what they wanted anyway. So in this particular project, they had this big entry lobby when you would first walk in. And we designed the concrete. I managed the mix designs and was on site for the place and finishing, and everything went great. Well, in this front lobby, they had a 12-foot tall by 15-foot wide stainless steel laser cut logo made of their company name and the world. And it was just, an awesome and amazing piece. I think it cost like $100,000 to get this thing made. And it was like the tone set for everything that they could do, right? And the superintendent on this job, on this building, which it was about a 50,000 square foot, give or take, project, the superintendent was one of the nephews of the guys that ran it. So his last name was the same name as the company. For whatever reason, and I still to this day am utterly and completely baffled by this, he decided to allow the sprinkler contractor to set up their threading station in the main lobby area. So, you figure he's got 50,000 square feet to put it in, right? And he puts it in the main lobby area. But they did a great job of protecting. They put a piece of plywood down under the threading station. then proceeded for 2 months to thread pipe there. And when we showed up to polish, there was this off kilter, off center, 4x6 sheet of plywood, perfectly rectangular block out, and then oil all over this logo. Like the whole area around it had splatters and footprints and, all kinds of stuff, because that was their sum total of their protection was one piece of plywood. And so it would throw oil, 10, 15 feet out as they're pulling pipe off, flipping it, turning it, rethreading it, whatever. And so in the end, we couldn't salvage it, and they covered that entire stainless steel logo. They put tile in the front lobby. So you got 49,000 feet of the building is polished concrete, and 1,000 feet of it is tile over $100,000 logo.
That makes me nauseous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say that that was the first and only time that I've ever had a building owner fire the superintendent and disinherit them at the same time.
Nice.
The meeting where I said, guys, there is literally nothing I can do. I've tried every single thing that I can come up with. You have, 9 months of everyday oil. It's just soaked so deep I can't even get it out. And I there's nothing I can do. It was a crazy, crazy, crazy meeting. But anyway, so that gives you an example of, something that can happen even when you specify everything perfect and you manage everything perfect. If a lack of attention to detail by some key people in the project can cause major damage that, changes the entire trajectory of a project. So so if the Career Tech Center was your favorite, what was one that we learned the biggest lessons on? What is one that you can say, man, I learned what not to do there? And it doesn't even have to be a project that I was ever involved with. It could be earlier than that, or, at any time in your career. What's one project that you said, man, we learned a lot of lessons there?
Oh man. I think this was a big high school project. I won't name it. It was probably the fifth or sixth significant project with this particular client that was going to have had polished concrete specified as the flooring finish. They knew the benefits of it. They had the right expectations for what it would look like when it was finished, with the type of project it was. There was no false expectations like we spoke about earlier. But the way the project was designed, there were areas within the building that still required very heavy construction equipment to access certain parts of the building, even after an initial grind. And I think on that project, we did do an initial grind when the floors, or when the concrete was poured after it had cured. But still, the sequence, everybody had an understanding of what was required to protect the floors and what the expectations were for the flooring when it was finished. But the sequence was unavoidable. So perhaps knowing the way that floor plan was designed and the sequence that would be required to execute the design, we might have employed a different strategy around the flooring finish, or specifically designed access into those areas that still had very heavy construction requirements, even once we were starting to finish out the inside of other parts of the building. I mean, it was, what do we have, like dirt trails going through the main corridors of the building?
I'm pretty sure that I know which project you're talking about. So it's the one that had the big courtyard in the middle of it.
That's right.
The big open air courtyard. Yeah. Okay. So about maybe a month and a half, 2 months before building turnover, on this particular project, which I was there the next day, so I saw good pictures of it and saw the result of the damage. There was a sky lift. They were fixing something on like the flashing at the edge of the roof line or something like that, and it just started pouring down rain started pouring down rain, and this SkyTrack literally bogged down in this courtyard, which was probably, I don't know what, maybe 2,000 square feet. It was a decent sized courtyard. It bogged down almost to the top of the wheels, like above the hubs, and they couldn't figure out how to get it out. So they drove. This is I literally, to this day, I can't think of how you would do this without doing a better job, but they drove a tracked backhoe through the finished school. So, I mean, like, it's painted, lights are up, everything's closed up. You're a month away from turnover. And they drove a tracked backhoe down the central corridor with no floor protection to use the backhoe to pull the skylift out of the mud, and then turned around and drove the tracked backhoe back out. Now, they didn't put plywood or anything like that down. They just drove it on the concrete. And I asked the superintendent, what did you think was going to happen? He said, well, I thought the concrete was strong, so I thought it would be fine. I'm like, do you not see the fins? I mean, that's a 20,000 pound piece of equipment with literally like straight fins that it rides up onto. You've got 5,000 PSI concrete and 45,000 pounds per square inch of pressure under those fins. I don't think 5,000 will hold up to 45,000. He said, oh, I didn't think of it that way. Am I remembering the right project?
Yes, that's exactly right. And that made me think of something else as you were describing that situation. You get into these projects and there's a deadline, there's end users coming, and things happen. I mean, weather happens, events of God, pandemics. And so that can all radically change your plan. And so then you start pivoting and setting forth phasing plans like, okay, we need this portion of the project done, non-negotiable. But we can live with the adjacent space not being finished the day that the end users show up. So that's basically what happened here. They said, that area is not critical. That courtyard is not critical path. The inside of the building is critical path. So we're going to focus our resources and our efforts on the inside of the building. Oh, but now we have to finish the courtyards, and that's going to require this heavy equipment. And then they, exacerbated the issue by getting the SkyTrack stuck, and then, on we went. That is another example of all well-laid plans will change, and you have to be on top of it every step of the way, because if we sequence that out from the beginning the right way, might not have been an issue, but every construction project has issues that affect the schedule that are out of everyone's control, and you have to pivot appropriately, and we certainly didn't on that one. And they could have avoided what you just described, obviously. But
just by putting plywood down and
exactly.
Letting sheets of plywood and rolling the backhoe on the sheets of plywood would have distributed the weight and not damaged the concrete.
Of course. But what would have been better is if we had avoided creating the opportunity for that to happen anyway, which probably 12 months prior to that, when we decided to change that construction sequence, nobody thought about that.
Right. So, that the first project that we talked about, the one with all the logos, that one was, I don't recall the exact date, but it was a long time ago, well over a decade ago. So you've watched, as an architect, you've watched polished concrete go from, 20 years ago, it was effectively zero. I mean, I was teaching architects about polished concrete for the very first time, a little over 20 years ago. And you've watched it go from that to where it is today, which is over 40% of all hard surface floors are done polished concrete today. What are some of the biggest takeaways from your perspective as an architect that you've got to see as that flooring type has evolved?
I think it's been the level of sophistication with the construction managers and their continued evolution of understanding of what it takes to make those flooring finishes successful from day one. We just had it, another major high school project, 530,000 square foot building, 30-month construction project where the majority of the spaces are polished concrete. And it's not open yet, but from what I've seen, it's highly successful because of the full understanding on their side of what it takes to protect it, how to sequence it, how to get in and do the early grinds, how to go in and acknowledge when you need to make corrections. Perhaps the concrete mix or the curing compound didn't work correctly and you get spalling or something like that. And knowing based on the specs that you've written, what is required of them to fix that, as opposed to throwing their hands up, going, well, what do we do now, George? It's just a much better understanding amongst the construction community, and not just with the construction managers, but all the other trades that we've talked about that can affect the success of these floors. Having a better understanding of what is required of them to make it successful.
I know that we've done, probably with VLK, we did something that now a lot of the industry is following behind, but because of my involvement with you guys, essentially VLK was kind of like the pioneer of this, and that was, in your education customers, we would have the common spaces like the halls and the cafeteria and all the entrances and all the higher visibility areas. We would do those in polished concrete, and there's a good budget for that typically in construction. But the classrooms are a lot less traffic and a lot less visible, and so districts, as they're trying to chase the ever reducing dollar, they want to keep trying to save more and more, value engineering more and more money out. We kept running into schools that would budget for VCT, the lowest install cost, but also the highest maintenance cost flooring that you can install. And something that we've been successful on VLK projects that now everybody else is doing is basically doing a modified, reduced work polished concrete finish in classrooms for effectively the same money as VCT. In your opinion, how have your customers, how receptive have they been to that? And I'm involved a lot of times in the construction, but I don't talk to them a year or two later when you guys are, as you talk about the next project. Overall, how has that been received, and what are your thoughts on that?
I think it goes along with anything else. You put your money where it has the most impact. And so, to your point, classrooms, they might not have the same level of foot traffic, but they can, especially in laboratories and art labs and primary grade level classrooms that have sinks and whatnot in them, where they're doing a lot of messy work. The classroom floors can receive a lot of abuse. So something that's durable, something that is easily maintained is very attractive to them, and something that doesn't cost them a lot down the road like it does with VCT. And you're covering it with desks, rugs in some cases, soft seating. So to specify something that is a lower level finish than you would have out in a entry lobby or a library or a big gallery space makes a lot of sense. It's the same thing we do with other finishes. We're not going to put all our money on the back side of a building that nobody sees. We're going to put it at the entry. So I think that it's been successful. I think it does allow the right distribution of funds to where it matters for the client and still meets the ultimate goal they have, which is less cost in their maintenance of the facility over the course of the next several decades.
Mm-hmm. Do you, as you've continued to go on and as polished concrete has continued to evolve, what do you see from an architect's perspective? What do you see coming down the line? Do you see polished concrete continuing to expand? Do you think it's about, a lot of the floors are polished concrete, but some of the floors are definitely not. What do you kind of just general, what do you think the future looks like for polished concrete in you guys' project or category?
So I'm really just pontificating in answering that question, but for starters, it's a timeless floor, just like kind of terrazzo is, but obviously a lot less expensive than terrazzo. So I don't see it going anywhere. And if you think about it in terms of the longevity of the building, it definitely is the absolute best flooring finish you can put down from a capital investment standpoint over the life of the building, because you do not have to go back in there and strip it and re-wax it. You do not have to replace it. And I think, like I said, concrete's timeless. So you might have a low maintenance, not lower than concrete, but a low maintenance tile floor that you could go in, but in 20 years or less, it might have, I guess, become a bit dated.
Dated,
which concrete doesn't. I also think that any other flooring type that the world comes up with that is an addition to what we already have or evolutions of what we have, that's still additional materials cost. You're always going to have a concrete substrate. That's the foundation of the building, like you mentioned earlier. So if we can continue to capitalize on utilizing that as the flooring finish, whether you add enhancements through decorative aggregate or deeper grinds or integral colors, whatever they may be, I still think that's the absolute best investment that any owner can make in their buildings, as long as it's appropriate for the user, from all the other variables that we have to consider in regards to acoustics and functionality and whatnot. Yeah, so I think you know better than I would in regards to what new technologies and advancements can be applied to polished concrete, but we haven't even hit what's out there yet. You and I have talked endlessly about, I really want to do a tilt wall building that's got some really cool additives in it, whether it's glass or metals or different colored rock. That's still going to happen. I just haven't found the right project for it yet.
So what Sloan's talking about there is doing a tilt wall, where you do the outside facing wall up when you cast it, and then before you lift it, you bring the grinders in and you grind and expose finishes. And you can do like one that I've been looking for a project to do this on. There's a glow in the dark rock that you can use. So include whatever color rock you want, say it's reds and blacks, for example, and then seed the surface as the rock in the mix, and then you seed the surface with a glow in the dark aggregate as well. Well, now through the day, when that's all ground and exposed through the day, you see blacks, reds, and white rock on the outside of the building. It gives a really cool aesthetic appearance. You can do colors or whatever, browns, reds, whatever of the concrete in addition to whatever the aggregate is. But I like the glow in the dark idea, because at night you're driving down the freeway, you look over, you see this cool school or whatever, and the building is actually glowing because it's the glow in the dark rock been exposed, and it's absorbed sunlight through the day so that it glows all night. I can't wait to do that. But that finish is 10 times more durable than paint, will literally last forever. And because it's mechanically smoothed, it doesn't have the issues that like paint does. It doesn't have bubbling or peeling or moisture issues or anything like that, because it's all mechanically ground and then chemically sealed. So it's sealed internally. And so I think that you're right. That is something that we haven't touched the surface of that yet. We've done projects that have mother of pearl and glass and color and designs, standard rocks exposed. We've done recycled materials. We've done metal. That's one thing we didn't talk about, Sloan. We do in all of the VOK, high school education projects, how we put metal in the auto shops and the woodworking shops.
Right. I forgot about that.
Do that for increased durability under heavy loads. Yeah. So in your mind, the green building effect essentially of taking the foundation of the building and not adding another surface layer on top, that's a huge benefit that'll keep it continuing to grow. And the fact that the maintenance currently are about 35 to 40 cents per square foot per year versus VCT at around $2.50 to $3 per square foot per year. That low maintenance cost is a huge component. And then the fact that if you have tile or anything else that can get dated, polished concrete, say 10 years in or 20 years in, you can go in and for half the cost or less of the original install, you can bring it all the way back to where it was. You can change the colors, you can change patterns or do whatever. And you don't need to shut the school down to remove an existing flooring and put a new flooring in. You can keep everything rolling, move very fast, refurbishing that finish and bring it all the way back to where it was 10 or 20 years before. That has the benefit too. And you think those are the main components of the future, kind of why people will continue to grow with polish?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I didn't think of that when we're talking about tilt wall, some of the things that we're having to do with the envelope of the building to meet energy code now is pretty intense in regards to just the composition of the exterior wall. From an insulation standpoint, a vapor barrier standpoint, the sheeting that we're required to use and the way it's sealed and flash and everything. We take a lot of that out of the equation with concrete tilt wall. You can do an impregnated, insulated tilt wall panel, and you're there. And you made me think of that when you mentioned the paint finish. There's a lot of finishes that we can apply to the exterior of the wall that are highly durable, that last forever, such as masonry. In some sense, metal panels, depending on what their finish is, and you've got UV considerations of UV exposure to the paint finish of the metal panels that over time will fade. But concrete is obviously as durable as masonry, and you have basically one trade erecting the entire exterior wall of the building, as opposed to multiple trades when you take into account masonry, vapor barriers, exterior sheeting, steel structure if you have that, or CMU, then
the painter.
And then the painter. I mean, just on and on and on. So there's something there that I think, and again, that's changed. That's changed for the end user in these types of projects that we do. That's because I'm not talking about industrial warehouses. I'm talking about schools and car dealerships and office buildings. That's a change for them. It's a change for us. It's not technically a traditional way of going about designing our projects, but I think there's a lot of future opportunity there as well, as it pertains to what we need to do to meet energy code requirements. And by the way, don't ever mention the glow in the dark rock to my designers; they'll lose their minds. So every project will have glow in the dark rock from now on.
If you dig around in your sample room, I brought a sample up there a few years ago and dropped it off. But the problem is that it sits in a lighted room, so everybody looks at it and thinks it's white rock, and nobody is in the room when you turn the lights out, so you can't see it glowing. So I don't think anybody realizes what it is anymore. And I only showed it at that time to one or two people, and I had to get like a paper towel tube to show them the glow in the dark, because obviously it's the middle of the day in your offices. But it's already there. It's up to you if you want to go find the white rock exposed aggregate sample in your closet.
Oh my God, I might have to. That's funny.
All right, I want to ask one more question, or kind of set one more thing up, and then we'll kind of close out. So as I travel around the country and as I get engaged with projects of all types, sometimes I'm in on the design, sometimes I'm in repair. I come in at the end when something's gone wrong and try to help fix it. One of the things that I see very common, and this is more just, I'd like you to kind of talk in general to architects and owners. One of the things that I see very commonly is As an architect, you're required to have continuing education credits to keep your licenses intact. Manufacturers come and do lunch and learns where and I think COVID has played with some of that a little bit, but essentially manufacturers come and do lunch and learns where they'll teach you about finishes, and they'll show you basically their products. I find all over the country architects with specifications that are either directly from a manufacturer, or they're kind of cobbled together bits and pieces of a couple of different manufacturer specs. When I come in, I usually just scrap all of that and I start over with a more comprehensive spec that isn't skewed towards chemicals or skewed towards equipment, but it's kind of comprehensive. What is your kind of general thought about the way that a lot of architects get those specs from lunch and learns? And then how would you recommend architects look at polished concrete versus maybe say like a CMU block wall or, lighting fixtures that a manufacturer spec might be a little bit more appropriate? What are your general thoughts about that?
Well, I'm kind of jaded, I guess, in following manufacturer specifications without kind of any analytical thought to how it affects the entire project in general. I mean, obviously, if you want a certain system or a certain product, you need to be very attentive to what the manufacturer's requirements are. That's a no-brainer. And you got to make sure that you're not reinventing their wheel and that you are properly specifying in order to get what they provide correctly. But you have to be attentive to how that affects the rest of your project. And so it's really just about, it's not a new story. This has been the case in the architecture and engineering professions since the dawn of time. You have to see the whole picture. You have to understand the waterfall effect that your decisions have on the remainder of the project. I mean, everything affects multiple things. The decision you make with one material or one system is going to affect 10 other things that you have to be able to foresee and address accordingly. So I think that for me, polished concrete's been a perfect example of that as I've learned how to use it over the years and how it affects the concrete specification, how it affects, general requirements from the construction team, how it affects the way that we administer the contract for construction in regards to construction phasing, and schedule of values in the pay application for the materials and the trades that are ultimately involved with the polished concrete floor. So I think it's good to have that education and things like lunch and learns, but I think this is why we've used you as a consultant for so long, that it's a specialty, and you have to have that specialty expertise to be sure that you have all your other bases covered. And you should never, ever, ever holistically rely on the manufacturer's specifications on its own.
Well, that's a pretty ringing or clear opinion. So that's perfect. That's what I was, I wanted to kind of hear your thoughts about that, because I run into it literally all the time.
Sure.
And a lot of times, unfortunately, I find specifications that are at odds with each other. I'm looking at a project right now that has one manufacturer for a polished overlay topping, and in the specs, they have a separate manufacturer identified for the leveling material underneath. The topping material cannot physically bond to the leveling material that they have, and now the whole topping is delaminating because they used two different manufacturers and the products aren't accommodating, and now they have a problem and they're like 4 weeks from opening. And I'm having to go in and kind of show them what's wrong, and so that's an example of where that comes in. So
we've done it. We've done it. How many times have we specified an admixture that doesn't allow the polish process to happen, or a curing compound?
Right. Yeah. I catch it in the submittal reviews as your consultant, I'll catch those issues when I'm looking at the submittals provided. I'll say, oh, well, that admixture that is allowed in the spec will literally void all your warranties for flooring, and we'll get it changed. But yeah, it's easy. I think it's easier to do than most people realize. So
for sure.
Well, thank you for an awesome and fantastic interview. If people want to get a hold of you or VLK and look at your portfolio and talk to you guys about services, how do they do that?
Best way is just to go to our website, vlkarchitects.com. It's got my contact information there as well as the rest of our leadership group, and has a lot of examples of our work, and several of the ones that we've talked about today should be in there, and some thought leadership associated with our design and architecture, and probably some of the things we've done together, David. So that's the best way to learn anything you need to know about us or to get a hold of us.
Awesome. The one project that you guys did that you won an award for that I had no involvement in, that I'm disappointed that we couldn't get polished concrete, and that I didn't even know you were building it, is a elementary school in Bel Air, Texas, which is in the middle of Houston, called Condit Elementary. And that meant a lot to me because that was the school that I went to kindergarten and first grade at.
No kidding.
So it's also the school my dad went to kindergarten at, and all of my aunts and uncles went to kindergarten at, and my grandmother went to kindergarten at that school. And so you guys remodeled that school 5 or 10 years ago, where I had 3 generations, including myself, go there. I didn't know that you were doing it, and it had 0 polished concrete in it. So I really regret that I wasn't able to go back to the school that I built, or that I went to school at, to kindergarten at, to remodel it all these years later.
Man, I wish I would have known that. We would have gotten you involved.
Only regret. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you learned a whole lot from our conversation and from Sloan. Please reach out to VLK if you need services in any of the markets they can cover. I will tell you, everybody on the call, in all fairness, that VLK is actually building a commercial project for me right now, working on a commercial project for me. So I respect them enough as an architect to not only help them as a consultant, but to hire them when I needed a commercial building of my own. So thank you, Sloan, very much. I really appreciate it. And everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode. If you like this episode of Foundations, be sure to head over to our website, expertconcretetraining.com, for training videos and content tailored to your needs, interests, and job role. You can find topic and/or document links from today's discussion in the episode notes on our website. We appreciate your feedback, questions, and support. For specific job-related technical questions, please go to the Experts on Demand tab at expertconcretetraining.com. To suggest a topic for discussion on the podcast, please email info@expertconcretetraining.com. On behalf of David and myself, thank you for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you. The hosts and guests presented within this podcast have experience working with concrete, allowing them to provide insight concerning various construction conditions that might differ for the listener. The content and materials, as well as the products referenced within this podcast, are presented for general information only and are not presented as professional advice. Reference to specific products or service providers does not constitute an endorsement, nor illustrate that a particular result can be achieved. Listeners should take care to follow all product manufacturers' warnings and instructions and understand all applicable safety codes. The opinions, views, and statements made within this podcast are those of the hosts and guests only. If you have any questions, concerns, or issues on your project and need additional support, please reach out to your manufacturer or consult with a firm like ours for specific and direct assistance with your particular needs and concrete.